Well, I just thought I would let everyone know that while you were stuffing your face with turkey on Thursday, I had to carefully sift through my food and only eat certain things because I had dental skin grafting surgery. Yes. So there's a Thanksgiving message for you. So if you want to see what stitches look like in someone's mouth, you can come up to me and I can open my mouth for you. So yes, I've never preached before with stitches in my mouth, and this is a first. But I'm not in pain, which is just kind of crazy. So so good to be here. Also, real quick on the note of food, if you love to cook, if you had such a blast on Thanksgiving cooking and making food, our Christmas festival, we still need some food people. So please sign up at the information center if you love to make food.
And also, real quick.
Oh, okay.
See, we've never done this before. We also wanted to share, Juno has the measurements down. Ryan and Hartley welcomed their twin babies last Monday. They came. So Sage Noel is their daughter's name. She was 5 pounds, 9 ounces, and 18 inches. And then Shiloh John was their little boy. He was 4 pounds, 11 ounces, and he was 17 and 3/4 inches. So they're all doing really well. They were able to make it home in time from the hospital for Thanksgiving. So thanks to all those who have thought of them, prayed for them. I know they are really grateful, and they're doing well. So yay for them.
Wow, this is just like baby season too. If you are not on Facebook, and you didn't see, we did announce we're having a boy. So we're super excited to have a boy. Anyway, so that's all the food and baby stuff. What a crazy season. If you're new, we're so glad you're here. My name is Mark Lohman, one of the associate pastors. If you can't tell yet, this is my wife, Rachel. She too is an associate pastor. And so we kind of wanted to try something new this morning. As you can tell, we're both up here. So we're going to do some team teaching. And we've never done this before, but I think this will be fun. Hopefully you find it interesting and good. So hang with us if you're not used to having 2 people up here going back and forth. So a little review. We have the last 3 weeks gone through this series called Made to Worship. And the first week we kind of looked at a definition of worship, right? What exactly is worship? We tossed that word around a lot, but what is it? Then we looked at different forms, different expressions of worship, right? And then last week, Juno talked to us about worship as thanksgiving to prepare us for that week of Thanksgiving. And so now, as we end it this morning and next Sunday we start Advent, we kind of want to look at like the so what of worship. Like what is the purpose of worship? We come together here on a Sunday morning for a corporate worship service. Throughout the week, you do different types of worship activities, whether it be, a life group or prayer, fasting, the way you spend your money, all those things are worship. And so the question is, how does that connect to your life? How does worship change the way that you live?
So just pretend for a minute, hypothetically, that I represent worship. So anything that in your mind you associate with worship, singing songs to God, reading your Bible, prayer, fasting, giving, that's what I represent. So
Rachel represents worship. For all intents and purposes, just think of myself as representing the word mission or missional, right? And that's a word that we toss out a lot that maybe we don't even understand. And so I represent this idea that God has given every single one of us a purpose and a call to go out and to spread the good news of Jesus in your neighborhood, in your family, in your workplace, with your talents, with your gifts.
And so the question that we'll kind of be wrestling with this morning is, do these two things, do worship and mission, do they go together? Because I think oftentimes we think of them as very separate, kind of disconnected things. They're just two things that don't naturally fit together. Kind of like drinking orange juice after you brush your teeth. You wouldn't put those things naturally together. Or a toolbox in my husband's hand. You wouldn't naturally give that to him. So we're going to be looking at, do worship and mission, do they fit together? What's their relationship and their correlation?
I will not retaliate.
You are getting a little
with
bit
good,
better
so
with the toolbox.
I am. I'm doing more stuff around the house. God works miracles. So, one of the things in this conversation that's really interesting that I've noticed is that churches tend to gravitate towards one end of the spectrum, right? One end of the spectrum over here is being really missional, while the other is being all about worship. And so churches tend to kind of be all about one and maybe leave out the other. And so this is an oversimplification, and so this isn't true of every church. But it seems like to me, more conservative churches will really tend to do the worship part well, right? So they'll have like really cool, sophisticated Bible studies, really powerful and great worship music. They'll encourage you to go do your devotional throughout the week with like your moleskin journal, what have you. But they don't really tend to make a big deal kind of about social justice issues, right? Fighting like racism, human trafficking, sex trafficking, things of that nature. They kind of tend to stay in like a Christian bubble. And then on the other end of the spectrum, over here on the missional side, again, an exaggeration, not always true, but you tend to have more liberal churches, and they'll do a great job fighting issues of social justice. And so they'll be on the front lines fighting racism and sex trafficking, human trafficking, dealing with the homeless and the marginalized. But then sometimes there isn't kind of a vibrant, strong, vertical relationship with God. There isn't much of a focus on worship and discipleship. Again, those are very, very broad exaggerations, but you get my point. And I think American church culture has made us think that it's one or the other. Your church is either all about worship, insider focused, or it's all outside focused and helping the disenfranchised and such. The thing is, that's also true of us individually in our personalities. We will tend to gravitate towards one of those two. But as usually is the case, the Bible doesn't leave us to do one of those two options. It's both. Following Jesus is all about worshiping him and living on mission. And so I'm going to just kind of give us a bird's eye view of what the scriptures have to say about this. That central to being human is actually two things. So we're going to go to Genesis 1, and we'll put it up on the screens for you. We have these free gray Bibles, as always, that you can use. So literally page 1, where it all starts, we get this description here of what it means to be made human. It's a fascinating question. What does it mean to be made human? What does it mean to be made in the image of God? And I think there's two things, and you can probably already guess what they are. So here's the first, Genesis 1:28. God blessed them, and he said to them, "Be fruitful and increase in number, and fill the earth and subdue it. Rule over the fish in the sea and the birds in the sky, on every living creature that moves on the ground." Couple key phrases. Be fruitful and multiply. Subdue. Rule. Now, it may not seem obvious to us because we don't deal with kind of king and kingdom language, unless like you're in Vegas at Excalibur or something like that. But the ancient reader would have picked this up right away. This is actually very royal, very king-like language. Because what God is saying to Adam and Eve, which represent all human beings, is he's saying that you are to be like a king. And you're actually to go out and to expand my kingdom. Be fruitful and multiply and rule and reign and fill the earth. And so our job as a human being is that we are actually all kings and queens, so to speak. And we are to expand God's kingdom, beauty and justice and goodness, to bring order out of chaos. And so that is the first part of what it means to be human. You have a mission to expand God's kingdom. Second part, Genesis 2:15, the next chapter over, just turn the page. We read this, chapter 2, verse 15. And the Lord God, he took the man and he put him in the Garden of Eden, and focus on these two verbs, to work it and take care of it. To work it and to take care of it. Again, we're not going to notice this as 2017 people who speak English, but again, in the ancient culture, very, very, very often in the Old Testament, when these two verbs are used together, work and care, they signify priestly responsibilities. Priestly responsibilities. Now, if you're thinking like, Mark, what in the world? Like, this verse says nothing about a priest. Like, did you eat too much turkey or something? The answer is no, I didn't eat any turkey at all because I had dental skin grafting surgery. So, let me give you an example of what's going on here, okay? Numbers 3:8. So, this is a passage that is written all about the formal priests in Israel. They're called the Levites. The Levites, what they were known for is that they were kind of the official priests of Israel. So here's an example where we see these two verbs in this context, referring to these priests. They are to take care of all the furnishings of the tent of meeting, fulfilling the obligation of the Israelites by doing the work of their tabernacle. Hopefully you're tracking with me. Here's what's going on. God is talking to Adam, which in Hebrew just means human. He represents all of us. And he says, I want you to work and I want you to take care of this garden. Really what he's hinting at is that the Garden of Eden is a temple where God's presence is dwelling, and that you humans, you are to be the priests who are taking care of it and guarding it and protecting it. Now I bring all of this up to say this one point now. What is the main job of a priest? The main job of a priest is simply to usher in worship to God. When it's all said and done, the main job of a priest is to usher in and to gather worship to God. So these are the two central parts of what it means to be a human. You are a king or a queen, and you are a priest. Now those are very kind of religious, sophisticated words. In modern day terms, here's what they mean. You're a king or a queen, you live on mission. You have a job, you have a task, you have a project to expand God's way of life, his kingdom. And then secondly, you're a priest, you are made to worship. You are made to worship God. Those two things, mission and worship, are never separated in the Bible. And in fact, they're kind of the two twins that should never be separated that make you a human being. Now, we see this all throughout the Bible. I could spend a couple hours showing you all this stuff. I'm just going to highlight two more. So we fast forward in the Bible. God, he gets the nation of Israel. He creates a people for himself. He talks to Charlton Heston on the mountain for the Ten Commandments. If you didn't get that, it's because you're too young, and that's okay? So God's talking to Charlton Heston, otherwise known as Moses, gives the Ten Commandments to Israel, and here's how he identifies Israel. Exodus 19:6. You will be for me, what? A kingdom, royal language, of priests. a holy nation. These are the words you are to speak to the Israelites. So God says to Israel, hey, you are my people, and your job is to be a kingdom of priests, to live on mission and to worship me. Fast forward again. Jesus shows up 1,000 years later, dies on the cross, resurrects from the graves, brings salvation to this earth. He creates a community of followers known as the church, which is us. And what is told of the church? 1 Peter 2:9. No surprises here. But you are a chosen people, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, God's special possession, that you may declare the praises of him who called you out of darkness into his wonderful light. A royal priesthood. Now we go all the way to the end of the Bible. And maybe you're thinking, well, this is the job of humans until Jesus comes back. Then Jesus comes back, finishes up the story. Everything works out well. It's a Disney fairy tale story, and then we're on to something else. No, not the case. This is actually what we do forever and ever. So the very last book in the Bible, the book of Revelation, chapter 22, here's what we see. So this is after Jesus has come back, new heavens, new earth. Here's what we read. The throne of God and of the Lamb will be in the new city, and his servants will worship him, and they will reign forever and ever. You and I were made to worship, and that will continue forever and ever. And you and I were made to be kings and queens who rule and reign. And that will go on forever and ever. Now this is interesting because the way I grew up in my Christian faith is I always kind of thought, okay, missions, being missional, that's just for until Jesus comes back. And then Jesus comes back and then everything's fixed. And so then all we do is worship in kind of heaven. And my understanding of heaven before was kind of sitting on a cloud with a harp. All the guys have long gray beards like Santa Claus. And we're all like singing opera or something as worship. And praise God that is not how the Bible describes heaven. But honestly, I'd be very, very, very willing to bet that most people think of heaven that way. Because heaven, yes, we will worship Jesus forever. Absolutely. Let me be crystal clear on that. But you will also live on mission forever. And sure, mission, it doesn't look like the way it looks now because sin and death and cancer and racism will be absolutely done away with. But there will be new projects and new tasks and new responsibilities. And so all of this to say, you are a king and queen and a priest. You are made to live on mission and to colonize this earth with God's kingdom and to worship him.
Okay, we'll do a little switcheroo here. So when Mark said that he could spend hours showing us examples of where those two names are for human beings in the Bible, kings and priests, he's not joking. I think it was Wednesday we were working on our message before Thanksgiving, and he spent a couple hours showing me all these examples in Scripture. First of all, I have to say, I think my husband's the smartest guy that I know because he's just rattling all these things off. And I'm like, how do you know all this? I went to seminary too, but I don't know all this. He just remembers so much. But I say that because when you start to put those pieces together, you see that the Bible is this giant story where literally the beginning of it is echoed at the end of it. And it makes sense. I used to think it was just this sort of old historical textbook in the Old Testament and then nice parables about Jesus, in the New Testament, and then what we look forward to in heaven. But when we understand that our human vocation, our calling, is this twofold assignment to be on mission, to extend this kingdom, and to foster and worship for God, and that this is something that was given to the first human beings in the garden, and this is something that extends into the new heavens and the new earth. That changes the way that we spend our time now. That should change the way that we view what it means to follow Jesus. And I'm still sort of in the process of sifting through, okay, what are the practical implications of this? How does this change what it means for us today to be followers of Jesus? And so we're going to get into that a little bit. But as I asked at the very beginning, the question, do mission and worship go together? We don't often think that they would be paired together, but as you're starting to see from what Mark has explained, yes, they do. And that's actually God's design. He designed worship to fuel us to be sent out on mission so that we experience his heart in worship. And that trickles down and out to our hands and our feet, that we are mobilized then to take the good news of this God that we worship to those who don't yet know him. And then it's sort of like this cycle when we're out on mission, and if you guys have had encounters with people who are on the cusp of finding who Jesus is, or they are just lost and searching for hope, and you have sort of those amazing miracle moments, and you're just like, wow, God. And you're sent back right to his feet worshiping him. And so these two things are meant to fuel each other. That is God's design. But I know that living this way, allowing our worship to fuel mission and vice versa, it doesn't come easily. And so we're going to take a look at what God has to say when we neglect one or the other. And we're going to look specifically at what he has to say to Israel when they neglect the mission component. See, Israel was really good at worship. They knew how to dress like fancy church people. They knew how to be religious and holy. But they forgot the mission part. They forgot what worship was supposed to lead to. And I think this is such a timely reminder for us today, because it's my observation that most middle-class American evangelicals, they lean the same way. I'm guilty of it too. I think it's partially because it's a lot easier for us to stay in this mindset of worship and do what's comfortable in our Christian circles than it is to get out of our comfort zone and to love those who don't know Jesus. So I'm going to be reading from page 473 in these gray Bibles, or you can follow along with me on the screens. I'll be in Isaiah 1. This is what God says to Israel when they forget about mission. He says, "The multitude of your sacrifices, what are they to me? I have more than enough of burnt offerings, of rams and the fat of fattened animals. I have no pleasure in the blood of bulls and lambs and goats. When you come to appear before me, who has asked this of you, this trampling of my courts? Stop bringing me meaningless offerings. Your incense is detestable to me. New moons, Sabbaths, and convocations, which were like meetings, I cannot bear your worthless assemblies. Your new moon feasts and your appointed festivals, I hate with all my being. They have become a burden to me. I am weary of bearing them. And when you spread out your hands in prayer, I hide my eyes from you. Even when you offer many prayers, I'm not listening. Your hands are full of blood. Wash and make yourselves clean. Take your evil deeds out of my sight and stop doing wrong. Learn to do right, to seek justice, to defend the oppressed, to take up the cause of the fatherless, to plead the case of the widow." When we read passages like this, we see that it's pretty black and white. God's heart, his desire is that we would pair worship and mission together. That all of this religion and sacrifices and worship that Israel did, that it would lead them to do something with it, particularly in the realm of justice. And so we see this ongoing throughout the Old Testament. Israel continually spends all of their time doing churchy things and forgets to love the oppressed. And they get reamed many times by God. So if you didn't catch the tone of that the first time, here it is again in Amos 5:21 through 24. God says to Israel, "I hate and I despise your religious festivals. Your assemblies are a stench to me. Even though you bring me burnt offerings and grain offerings, I will not accept it. Though you bring me choice fellowship offerings, I will have no regard for them. Away with the noise of your songs. I will not listen to the music of your harps. But let justice roll on like a river, and righteousness like a never-failing stream. We see what he's getting from Israel, and we see what he wants, what he desires for Israel. See, God hates these trivial religious charades. It's like a game that Israel was playing. And it's a good reminder to me, if I put myself in the shoes of Israel, I think, okay, what would that translate to in modern days? You know, religious people or people who would act like Israel, you know, they care about how many hours a day they're in prayer and who sees them when they're praying and how many committees they're a part of and how many church services they can attend at all the churches in their city in a week. And they get all, distracted over things that I think God would probably not be too happy about. Things like worship music and what the pastors wear and what color their church is painted. These debates start to consume time and energy when instead God is saying, my heart for you is to be on mission with your time and your energy. Not just to stay within your Christian bubble of comfort. He says, I want you to seek justice, to defend the oppressed, to take up the cause of the fatherless or the orphans, to pay attention to the widows, to meet their needs. That's my heart for you. Because when we get that, you guys, we get the heart of the Father. That's exactly what he's done for all of us. And I think for the American church today, this message is a wake-up call. See, worship reflects the condition of your heart. And it'll show what your true motivation is. And if the heart is not obedient to act in the way that Jesus did, like pursuing justice, then all of the churchy sacrifices in the world, they mean nothing to God. That's what we can learn from these passages. Because it's his desire for both Israel and for us today that we'd walk in this full understanding of what it means to be human, of how he's created us. It's two parts. It's worshiping him, but it's allowing that worship to fuel us to be sent out on mission. It's not one without the other. And us being on mission, I think, is in many ways the true evidence that we've experienced a life-transforming relationship with Jesus. Because when you spend time with him, when you worship him, you start to act like him, to think like him. Your feet should be mobilized to go be like him in your communities, in your workplaces, in your schools. You naturally start to have a heart for the people that Jesus loved. And you start to understand what this kingdom is that he's asked you and me to spread. And friends, that is a kingdom where justice flourishes and compassion is there for the lost. It's a kingdom for the least of these, the upside down kingdom. And so you can understand that because God has created worship and mission to fit together, he has a distaste in his mouth when Israel forgets one. They've missed the point. Their worship was not accompanied by a commitment to justice. And this is a real gut check because I just wonder what God would say to us in this area today. That we may think we're doing all the right things by reading your Bible for 10 minutes in the morning and spending time in prayer and volunteering and listening to the Fish 95.9 in your car and attending your life group. And all of those are really good things. Like, I would be so happy if 100% of us were doing all of those things because those acts of worship will draw us closer to the Father. But it can't stop there. If worship doesn't lead to mission, to us getting out of our Christian comfort zone and loving the people who don't know Jesus, the oppressed, the marginalized, the poor, the people you see on the side of a freeway, if we're not doing that Monday through Saturday, then much like Israel, we're missing the point. And it begs the question, are we even worshiping this God that we profess we are?
So, preaching, the worst part about preaching is that when it's done correctly, it will convict you like crazy. And Rachel and I were just really convicted about this topic. And, it's easy as pastors, especially pastors, we can kind of do the worship part somewhat well. But the missional part, there's kind of a tendency to kind of put that to the side or to have other people do it or whatever. And so even just reflecting on our own lives, it seems like we spend so much time, listening to a podcast of our favorite pastors or reading books on spiritual formation rather than just getting to know our neighbor and asking them what their needs are. How can we love on you? And so we are just kind of reflecting on this, and out of vulnerability, out of humility, letting you guys know, we need to do way better on this. But it also reminded us a couple months ago of an experience, of a story of ours that was deeply, deeply transformative for us. And it was because we were living on mission. And when we did that, it actually did send us back to worship God. And so Rachel's just going to share a little bit of that story.
Yeah, and what's crazy is this was such a simple thing. So a couple months ago, one evening, Mark and I were outside in our front yard, and Mark had found this rake on Amazon that you can use to rake your AstroTurf, which is a thing that people need, is rakes for that. So it had just come in, and we were all excited, and he's like, I'm gonna go use my new tool. See, he's getting better at the tool thing. And so he's outside, and he's raking up the acorns and the twigs that have fallen off our trees, and I'm putting them in the dustpan and dumping them in the trash. And we see this elderly, really frail-looking woman walk down the sidewalk, and she's walking right past us. And so we say hi as she walks by, and after she passed, I wondered, is this lady homeless? She was just so thin, she looked like she hadn't eaten in a while. And so a couple of minutes go by, and I look up, and she's like a block down, and she's sitting on the curb. I thought that's kind of weird. It almost looked like she had fallen. And so I say, hey, Mark, let's go see what's going on with her. Something's not right. So we walk up to her, and Mark helps her stand up back to her feet, and we introduce ourselves, and he says, hi, my name's Mark, and this is my wife, Rachel. And she says that her name's Bonnie, and we ask her where she's going. She's got a bag with her, and she kind of fumbles to be able to talk, and she's missing most of her teeth, and she just kind of points up over this hill, which was too far for her to be walking. It would have been a couple miles from our house. And so we say, well, we can give you a ride. And so Mark goes and he gets a car, and we get Bonnie in the front seat, and she just keeps directing us, okay, turn here, turn there. And after a couple of minutes, we end up at this old red apartment building, and we drop Bonnie off, and her adult niece comes running out of the apartment, concerned looking. And it turns out that this precious woman, had spent a week in the hospital. And because we live kind of by Long Beach Memorial, she had just been released from the hospital, and her niece had arranged for a ride to come pick her up. But Bonnie was feeling pretty good. And she thought, no, I can walk home. It's not that far. It would have been 5 or 6 miles. And so as Bonnie's getting out of the car, we didn't talk at all about what we did. We were just having chit chat with her the whole time. And she thanks us, and she says, are you a minister? And it was just this really kind of weird moment, because we didn't talk at all about God. And it just showed me that Bonnie saw Jesus in those couple minutes that we shared together. But I think what was more convicting was the way that Mark and I saw Jesus in that moment. And we just saw a new side of his heart. We saw his heart for Bonnie in those minutes. And we probably talked about that experience for a couple hours that night. It was so simple, but yet it had touched us so much. And although we were hesitant to approach her at first, so we were like, I don't want to scare her. Like, well, I don't know. You never know what someone's story is. We were so glad that we did. And I just remember as Mark was driving her and I'm sitting in the back seat just thinking, yeah, this is what we're made to be doing. This is what it means to glimpse Jesus' heart for people who need help and can't repay you. Because he loves all of us so much, but his heart, it breaks for the needy. And that encounter that we had, 5 minutes of being on mission in our neighborhood, that sent us right back to worshiping God. So we were just amazed at his heart and what he had allowed us to experience in those couple of minutes.
So kind of to give you maybe a framework, I love analogies, I love illustrations. I think a helpful illustration to understand the relationship between worship and mission is think about your circulatory system. Like, I didn't see that one coming. So imagine worship as your heart, right? Your heart is kind of this central beating chamber that then sends out blood to the rest of your body. And missions, being missional, expanding God's kingdom, is kind of like the arteries and the veins in your body that are sent out from the heart and they go to the rest of the body, giving the whole body blood and nutrients so that it can be connected back to the life-giving center of the heart. I think that is kind of how worship and mission go together. I mean, they're a unified system. I mean, because, arteries and veins, without a heart, they're useless. They're useless. There needs something to be pumped. And the heart has no purpose if there's no arteries and veins. And so it's this circulatory system that it doesn't go in a circle, but for all intents and purposes, it does. The blood goes out, but then it comes back in to the heart. And it's just this cycle. And that is the same thing with worship and mission. They refuel each other. They go together. They need each other. So for this morning, we just want to ask, is that true in your life? I think a couple practical ways to figure this out is, do the people who know you, your family, your neighbors, your coworkers, do they know that you worship and attend a church on a Sunday morning? Or do they know that you love them because you care and meet their needs? Another way, when you look at your schedule, is your schedule full of just a bunch of life groups, Sunday morning church, prayer time, devotional time, all good things? But is your week consisted of just that and not loving on and caring for the marginalized, the oppressed, the disenfranchised? And those are all different people for us. Different situations, different circumstances with our friends. But what is your weekly schedule like? What fills it up? Is it mostly worship stuff? Or is it living on mission? Because I think the scariest question to ask, and to me it's the question of Isaiah 1, the question of Amos 5, and this should scare you. It scares me. If we aren't living missionally, are we really even worshiping? That's what God says in Isaiah 1. He says, I hate your religious festivals. I mean, what a question for new life. Are we just meeting, just doing church, worship things? I mean, I just plug in the name New Life to Isaiah 1 or Amos 5. Would that be true of us? I'm not saying it is. I'm just asking the question. Worship and mission go together. And let me talk real quick to the other side of this coin. So my generation, millennials, love social justice. And absolutely, as we should. So I say that as a positive thing of my generation, right? I mean, involved in countless nonprofits and volunteering, fighting sex trafficking, all that kind of stuff, which is awesome. But here's the thing. I don't think that lifestyle and that passion is sustainable without worship. Because a couple things will happen. You will either A, get burnt out, B, you're actually doing it for selfish fulfillment just to make yourself feel good. That's really why you're doing it. Or C, you're going to end up discouraged because you're going to realize that you can't actually fix and solve all the world's problems because there are a ton of problems that are way larger than you and a nonprofit. And so you need to be sent back to worship, to go back to the Father's arms and say, God, we need you. And so I just want to end us this morning with a quote. I think this quote will lead you to self-reflection. And so I want you to think of yourself as I read this. It's by Tim Keller. He says this: if a person has grasped the meaning of God's grace in his heart, he will do justice. If he doesn't live justly, plug in Isaiah 1 here. If he doesn't live justly, that he may say with his lips that he is grateful for God's grace, but in his heart he is far from him. If he doesn't care about the poor, it reveals that at best he doesn't understand the grace he has experienced, and at worst he has not really encountered the saving mercy of God. Grace should make you just. See, we're all equal at the foot of the cross. There is not one person, rich or poor, male or female, white, Asian, black, who doesn't need grace. And when you encounter the grace of Jesus Christ, I mean, that should just spill out of you to everyone else. And so we're going to invite the worship team back up. We're going to head into a time of response, just like we always do. And there's so many ways to respond this morning. We have communion here. I mean, if you had a radical encounter with the grace of God, that he has died for you, that he was raised from the dead for you, to forgive you and to bring you life. There's candles over here that you can light, maybe signifying, where is there a dark place in your life, your neighbors, your family, your coworkers, that the gospel can penetrate. There's a prayer team back there. This Sunday will be our last Sunday where you can give thanks and write on a leaf right over there by the cross, just to show gratitude. And so we just want to encourage you just to respond however God is working on your heart. And at this time, we're going to have the ushers come forward to take our offering. Money is not our God here. We don't worship money. And so tithing is a way for God to receive your offering so that we can do ministry around here. So I'm just going to invite the ushers forward and let's respond to God.